Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Learn to Code with Noob. Today I am going to share uh, some of the methods which I missed to share in my last video of component lifecycle, and also like 2 or 3 neat tricks of props and state inside a class component. And after that I will uh, give a higher level overview of how you can have or manage the state inside a functional component. Keep watching. Alright, so in this section of the video I will explain uh, basically one method which I left in the last section of component lifecycle, which is should component update. So if you have noticed that, for example, if I don't have this method implemented, right, uh, what it will do is, so in the terminal I will show you what is the thing which it does. So if I do the press me, so look at after 200 timestamp. So if I tap on press me, right, so after 200, like it just do it 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 actually hits the trigger method, right, and then it just says component did update. So triggered method, it renders it and it updates the component, right? So component did update. So if I press again, it will do the same thing, right? Rendered and triggered, component did update. But if you see, like, even if I'm pressing, like, technically when this text is now change pressed, it doesn't actually have to re-render it. Like, it doesn't have to say rendering triggered. I mean, it actually doesn't matter because this view is pretty small, and it doesn't matter if we are clicking on it and it re-renders. I mean, obviously if we want to change the text, right, if we want to change something on the UI, it makes sense whenever you press on it. If we want to change the text, it makes sense to re-render the UI because we are changing the state, right? So should component update method actually does that for us. So what I mean by that is, so if you actually override this method should component update, right, and just say, okay, if the state dot text is not equal to changed press, then we want this component to be updated. But if it is equal to change pressed, we don't want this component to be updated, right? So now if I just open this terminal, so if I tap on press me, right, so it still did rendering triggered, component did update, right? Now the text state is changed to changed pressed. Now if I'll tap again on it, it doesn't do anything. You see, it is not rendering the component again, or it's not updating the component, although when I am pressing I am still changing the state. So if you see, like, while I'm pressing I'm still changing the state. So I mean, I can do this to just to demonstrate it. I can just say pressed, just log pressed, right? So now I will see. So for the first time it will do, okay, after pressed triggered the render function and then component did update. Now the pressed is still triggered, you're seeing the component is didn't update. So this is one method to keep in mind. Generally, we shouldn't use this method because it is advised that if if you want to actually render a component which 95% of the time you want, because you are taking some action and you want to render a component, or it's changing the state and you want to render a component, you shouldn't override this method and it should work fine. But there might be some cases in which, for example, your UI is not optimizing and it is rendering a lot. It doesn't have to render a lot, and in that way you can control the rendering of the component so that it doesn't render every time. It only renders when there are certain set of conditions. It's not like, usually you don't need this method, but whenever you are optimizing your app, maybe this can be a solution to that method. Now, there are two quick things which I thought it might be useful while explaining this. So, if you see, like, before that, I didn't have, like, if you check my last video, I didn't have any types over here in my React.component, right? I had basically this, if you see, and this props was basically this. It was like literally this, right? And we were basically having the state which has this text, right? And also I had this, so read only. So I had this in my previous video, right? And if I did like should component update, um, the TypeScript really doesn't know what is the type of the state, right? So this was whatever was my previous implementation, and TypeScript kind of complains about it over here when I'm implementing should component update. So actually, in React, like in TypeScript, you can specify what is the type of the prop and what is the type of state in this component, right? So how you can do that? So the first thing you can do is basically define a type. So this is my type which I have defined for my state. And so what I will do over here is, okay, so my prop type can be this, and my state type can be this. It's my state type. So now all of a sudden my error is gone. The reason is because now TypeScript knows that, okay, the state type of this React component is state type, right? So how did I actually figured it out? It's basically, if you look into the React.component definition, it basically says P as in props, right? And comma S as in state. Now I don't know what this double S means. I haven't looked into it yet. But this is props and this is state. So in order to define the property of in order to define the type of props, you can define it by this, or you can actually define an actual type. And in order to define a type of state, you can just say comma whatever your state type is. And if you don't do anything, it automatically defaults it to your props will be an object and your state will be an object. So both will be like a simple object without any type. Just I thought this is a really neat thing which I found out. I mean, I know we really don't use class components anymore, but yeah, it's still helpful. Now, if you're wondering how you can do it in the function, so in the function, like your props are defined whatever is your parameter, right? So in your parameter, if you are to have a parameter called text, and you can define the type of it, so state type. So this is automatically is your props now. And how you control the state in the function component, um, I will explain that in later videos. Alright, so in this section of the video, I will explain and give a higher level overview of hooks. I am not explaining like all the hooks methods, but I will explain hooks step by step, and it will be covered in different section of the videos. So it won't be all in one video, it will be in parts. So as I am actually learning this hooks, I am just sharing this on my YouTube channel. Alright, so before, in the previous section of the video, we actually learned something about how we can make like class components, right? And how we can see what are the lifecycle methods which come into play when the component is on the screen, right? And when the component is redrawn or when the state is updated. So we saw a lot of cool things with it. Um, so it, so if you see, like, in order to actually maintain the state and to actually like do lot of like state management and um, calling the methods, or basically setting up the initial states and everything, like it kinds of look messy when you actually use the class components. So the reason why I'm saying that is, so for example, if you want to set a state, set the initial state, you have to like do it in the constructor, or um, yeah, so do that in the constructor, like set up the initial state, and maybe your logic of tear down will be in the component will unmount. But there are like there are many things which are like separated in some separate functions, which should be in one function. So um, so there are like some of the problems with the class components, and you can also read about them when there is a very good article of which is done by the Facebook guys. It is called Introducing Hooks. So in the Introducing Hooks web page, like this is the web page, I can just share this thing with you. So from here I am basically reading the hooks thing, and it basically goes deep into the motivation, like why there was a need of introducing hooks. And so there was the one thing which they explained is that if you are working in React, there are like many patterns which like to render props and higher order components. So React, it basically says React doesn't offer a way to attach reusable behavior to a component. So this was also one of the motivation why Facebook guys introduced hooks, because you cannot build reusable components with classes. You can by using higher order components, but it becomes very messy and very complicated very quickly. And yeah, if you want to read more about why they have introduced hooks, I would encourage you guys to read this Hook's introduction. It is very thorough, and they have done a pretty good job in explaining it. So basically, so this was one of the motivation why they actually introduced hooks, like why Facebook guys introduced hooks, because you cannot manage state in class, and you cannot like build reusable stateful logic, right? Without if you without changing like the component hierarchy. So that's why they introduced hooks, which basically allows you to manage the state in effectively inside a functional component. So inside a functional component, so this was our functional component. If you remembered in my previous video, I have explained what is functional component, pure functional component. So you can watch those videos too. So yeah, so this is a functional component. So in the functional component, if you want to manage a state, you can use hooks for that. Now, if you have looked into my previous video, I explained how the flow of life cycle is of the class component. So if so I have just drawn out like a flow chart. I have also shared one of the flow chart which was done by the Facebook guys. It is pretty nice, but this is my way of like learning things, so I just made it more easier, I guess. So what I did was, so basically whenever your component renders, like a class component renders, your constructor is called, right? So your constructor is called, and after that the render function is called. So the render function is where you basically define the whole UI which you want to render, right? And then the mount is, and then the component gets mounted, right? So this is the basic, like simple way to look into it. You have a constructor, you initialize a state, and then render is called, which basically tells React what is the UI it wants to render, and then after that it is then the component gets mounted finally, right? And when we call set state, right? So when we call set state, it basically goes to should component update method, right? So if we go into the class component, right? So when we set state over here, like when I pressed the button, right, and the change is pressed, so when we do a set state over here, it goes to should component update method. I have explained about this method in my previous videos. So if it figures out that the component should be updated or not, based on that it again goes to render and then calls should component update. So based on should component update, if it is yes, then it renders, right? And if it is no, then it doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't do anything. So yeah, a simple diagram. It is a bit wrong in the sense if the component updates after render, it doesn't mount, because in this scenario the component is already mounted. So yeah, a bit of a diagrammatical view of the lifecycle components. Now let's jump right on to the hooks. Like, what are hooks? So if you see, like the way we set the state in class component is pretty messy, I would say. Like, you do like this dot set state, right? And you do this dot state, and it is an object. But if you go into the functional component, you just say useState, right? And inside the functional component, you specify what will be the initial value of this component when it is rendered and mounted, like at the very first time, what will be the value, right? So when you do that, in it returns actually two things. So the first thing which it returns is the object, right? And the second thing it returns is a setter method, which is basically you can say it is a dispatcher kind of thing, right? So this method is actually used to set or update the state, right? And you see, like, we don't have like only set state method here. Like, you can rename this method however you like. You can rename this method as set whatever, like set object, right? So now this is my return, and in this return I basically specify whatever the view it will render, right? And after that I have like a pressable thing which is covering this whole view, right? And whenever I click on this view, I basically print this text. So now when I click on this view, I just update the set count, right? And it updates the method, right? So it basically re-renders the component, right? And updates it. So in action, this is how it looks. Oops. So if I click on this, click this, right? So now you're seeing like nothing is happening, right? Like nothing changes. The reason is that if you see, when I'm calling set count, I am actually passing the same state, like the same initial state which was returned, right? So I'm actually passing the same initial state. So I'm changing nothing, right? So as soon as I pass something like this, right? Now, if I click on it, see, now it changed, right? So it basically re-rendered, right? When I said set count, text, blah, right? So it re-rendered the whole component and basically called this whole function again, right? And whatever the component needs to be updated, that component is totally updated, right? So now if I show you the logs over here, so here are my logs and here is that component, right? So if you see, like, when I'm clicking on it, it calls the outer renders, right? Inner render, above count render, outer render, inner renders, right? So I have placed these logs just to show you that the whole function is getting called. It's not like only this return is getting called, like the whole whole component gets rendered. So this whole thing is in the render, right? So the other best part of the use state is it basically preserves the previous state. So for example, if I want to change this whole use state to a counter, let's say this is a 0, right? And maybe I'll just rename this to count, right? And over here I will just set the state to the updated count plus 1, and here I will print the counter. Okay, so now let's see what happens. All right, so now you can see, like, every time it renders, it updates the counter. But the other thing which you notice is basically between two renders, like for example, So my first render was 0, right? This count was 0. And then when I'm doing the set count, right? Uh, when the set count happens, the count value, the state value is updated to 1, right? And then it will re-render. So between those two re-renders, it actually preserves the state. So what I mean by that is, like, it doesn't like it will not like reset the count value to 0 again. That's what I'm saying. So like now if I'll click over here, it preserves the previous value, like count was 8, right? And then 8 plus 1 came to 9. So it is preserving the value of this count, right? Otherwise on the next render, if it doesn't preserve the value, like this should be 0 and 0 plus 1 will be 1, right? So between the renders, it is preserving the state. So so yeah, this is the simple introduction to the useState hook and why we are using hooks and why there was a need of hooks in React components. In the future sections of the video, I will also explain like how the reconciliation of the state happens, like how when we do set count, right? How the React component knows that, okay, this is the only this is the only part which I need to render, right? So what are the diff algorithms it uses? I will give a higher level overview of that too. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, please don't forget to click on the like button. If you don't like this video, please mention why in the comment down below. Like, share and subscribe. Keep learning.